And one thing that, with Moses' story, it's so inspiring, but today we're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 4. And just to give you a little bit of background information, Moses, he was born Hebrew, and he was supposed to be killed because Pharaoh at the time, the king of Egypt, if you will, he was executing all of the newborn Hebrew boys in fear that they would one day take over his reign as king of Egypt. And so his mother, in a desperate attempt to save her son's life, she put him in a basket and sent him down the Nile River. His sister followed the basket, and she saw that he was picked up and adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. He was raised as an Egyptian. When he becomes an adult, he sees a Hebrew man getting whipped by an Egyptian, and he's moved to the point where he murders that man. He goes off into exile, and then we find him here in this story where he comes back, and he finds out that he is Hebrew, and God calls him. So that's just a super quick synopsis. Please, if you don't know the story of Moses, do your own study, look it up, read it for yourself. Book of Exodus, chapters 1 through 3. It's such a great story. And so we're picking up here in chapter 4 when God calls Moses. And God is calling Moses to lead his people, right? He's to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt from slavery, from under Pharaoh's reign, into the promised land of Canaan. And so, of course, this is a huge task to ask. And so Moses is feeling very underqualified for this huge task. And so Moses, in chapter 4, Exodus 4, verse 1, Moses answered, "But behold," actually, let me read from this Bible. Sorry. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you?'" Which is that's a very wise thing to think. What if he goes to the Hebrews? Remember, he grew up in the Egyptian household. So, his own identity, he's just now realizing, or recently found out, that he is in fact Hebrew, and met his biological family. And so it's a very wise question to say, what if they don't believe me? What if, they're like, who's this Moses guy who came out of nowhere and saying, God is going to free you. And these people have been in Egypt for over 400 years. So imagine they're waiting and waiting and waiting on God generation after generation, waiting for God to deliver them. And so now this, essentially random person named Moses is saying, God is going to free you. Of course, the people will have reservations, and they did at first. And so Moses is saying, he's saying to God, what if they don't believe me? And they say that the Lord did not appear to you. And then the Lord said to him, and this is what I wanted to focus on for today's Bible study, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took a hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," the Lord said, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." And so, a few things that I think are so significant with this is that Moses had an issue and he brought it to God, first of all, which is great. Sometimes we have an issue and we don't bring it to God, right? We have an issue and we bring those issues and problems to maybe other people or social media. Some people vent on there, or maybe we just kind of, compartmentalize it and just keep it to ourselves. And of course, there's nothing wrong with sharing with other people. We are all to love and support each other. There's nothing wrong with that. But we have to, we should bring things to God first and foremost. He is our guidance. Our daily bread is God. And so Moses brought it to God. And God, instead of answering him in a way that I think maybe Moses expected him to answer, who knows what Moses expected, but instead, God turned it around and he wanted Moses to look at what he already had available, what was already available to him. And I wrote here in the notes, I must have written this a long time ago because I didn't do it this time. I wrote, Moses' staff had a practical purpose and it represented vulnerability. The staff is significant because Moses doesn't realize that it's something that God could use. So God is pointing out something to Moses that is very ordinary, a very ordinary object of a staff. And, Moses going to God and throwing the staff on the ground, it allowed the staff to be used in a way that led, all of these people out of slavery. It was an instrument used for God's glory. And so I just want to jump ahead really quickly to Exodus 14. Exodus 14. This is where Israel is escaping from Pharaoh, right? So the rod, that same staff is used to prove to Pharaoh so many times that God is real and that God is really calling his people away from Egypt. And so that same staff we see here as Pharaoh and his men are chasing the Israelites, right? They are hunting them down. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still." And then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the waters so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground." So I thought this was significant because, again, even though Moses said all of these uplifting words to the people, to the Israelites, internally, Moses must have been praying to God desperately. Again, I do not blame him. The Egyptians are hunting him down. Pharaoh and his men are determined. So it's not like I blame Moses in any way. It's very understandable why he'd say, "God, help, please help me out a little bit here." Again, we see God turning Moses' attention to what is in his hand. What does he have available to him right now? And so that same staff that God repeatedly uses as an instrument is the one thing that Moses has available to him at that time to be used. Like he even tells God, "I'm not good with speaking." So Aaron helps with the speaking, and, he says to God, "How will they believe me?" And, Moses has all of these things, all of these reasons why he believes that he is not the right person for God to use. But what God instead looks at is, what do you have available? And so Moses, that rod that he has, is used several times for the glory of God. And this just helped me to reflect on, and think about what is in my life currently that God is wanting me to use for his glory. Because at the end of the day, our relationship with God, although he promises a life, of joy and goodness, at the end of the day, I want to make sure that I'm using my life to serve him and to bring him glory. And so thinking about the things in my life that I have available to me right now, there were a few things that popped up in my mind that I could think of that I can be a better steward of. I can use a little bit better. I can cultivate it in a way that will bring God glory. And so maybe you're the type of person that'll say, "I will read my Bible every day when I have the time." Well, you'll never get the time. That's just life. It will never happen. Or, "I will start studying the Bible when I have my own space to do so," or when I have a journaling Bible, or when I have this or that. And really those, at the end of the day, are just excuses. We cannot wait for the perfect time to do many things in our lives. Like, we have one life. Life is very brief, and we should act now. And so taking a look, just like Moses, God said, "What's in your hand?" Think about that for yourself. Pray about it. Ask God, what is in my possession right now that I can use to glorify you? And so, like I mentioned before, there's a few things that I know that God has put on my heart. And one of the things that I'm willing to share is my children. And so raising my kids, not just raising them, but raising them in a way that they can start implementing healthy habits to walk with God. So showing them, being a good example to them and implementing daily Bible study on their level. Of course, they're children, but implementing some sort of daily Bible study or Bible reading, being an example in the way that I carry myself or dress for my daughter, or even like the music that I listen to. I just find that, especially as my kids get older, they are sponges and they will absorb what we show them. And so I think, just bringing this to the forefront of my mind, just trying to instill those healthy habits as far as, their walk with God and their closeness with God, and teaching them how to study the Bible at their own level, and just values of the Bible. Not that I wasn't doing it before, but I just feel like I just have a heavier, that's just weighing on my heart right now, very heavily, to do better. There are ways that I can improve and do better. And like I said, there's other areas of my life as well, that I feel like God is saying, what is in your hand? There's opportunities where I can, do more to have God work through that thing and bring him glory. This also makes me think, we can't force anything. So if Moses, on his own strength, right? If God didn't point out, hey, what is that rod in your hand? If Moses was just like, I'm going to use this rod and I'm going to throw it on the floor and I'm going to make it, turn into a snake so that Pharaoh can believe me. Moses couldn't do that without the power of God, without the instruction of God. And that's why Bible study and following God and prayer and just having a relationship with God, I feel is so important, because how are you to know what God is leading you to do if you don't talk to him? Like I wouldn't know my kids as intimately as I do. I wouldn't be as close to them if I didn't talk to them, if I didn't hang out with them and spend time with them. And the same is with God. If I don't spend that time with God, how am I to know what it is that he's wanting to do, where he wants to move in my life? And so, the same thing, we can't force anything to happen. So if maybe you're trying to force something, I don't know, maybe it's like a certain career path or whatever it is, a relationship, let it go, let God work on that. We cannot force things to happen. We have to be, guided by God. God has to be in that for it to work. And that's not to say that, sometimes we have an impossible situation and God is telling us to move in that area. That's not to say that he's not the God of, impossibilities. Of course he is. He parted the Red Sea. All I'm saying is make sure that you are listening to his prompts and that you're not just going out and doing your own thing because that's what you want to happen. That's all I'm saying. So sometimes we ask God to move in our lives and he wants us to use what we do have. What do you have currently? How are you using that time or whatever it is wisely? How are you being a good steward in that thing? No matter if it's, in your role as a friend, a mother, a teacher, a wife, whatever it is, your time, your money, are you being a good steward of that? Or are you waiting until I will do this when? Are you waiting for the perfect time? Because that time will not come. And that's really, at the end of the day, it's just an excuse. Just do it now. Life is short. So I hope that I explained this okay. I really just felt that in the story of Moses. But please let me know what you learned. As always, I post a new Bible study on Wednesdays and Fridays at 7 a.m. Eastern. And I can't wait to study the Bible with you again. Bye.